IVM.
Welcome to Police Chowki, a special limited series on your favorite public policy podcast, All Things Policy. This series will take you behind the khaki uniform, beyond the flashing red beacon, and into the heart of the functioning of the Indian police force. We cast a critical eye on the role and function of the police in the Indian democracy, from the silent persistence of paperwork and meticulous investigation to risky counterterrorism efforts and policing in conflict zones. We explore the need for police reform and accountability in the system. Each episode brings you a comprehensive exploration of a unique facet of policing, illuminated by the insights of a former IPS officer who has lived the life behind the badge. So join us every Monday morning as we take you into the complex world of Police Chowki.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy Special Limited Series Police Chowki. I am your host Shrikrishna Upadhyay, and we have a very special guest on the show today, Dr. Pravin Tiwari. Dr. Tiwari is a civil servant with over 35 years of experience in auditing, accounting and financial sector regulation. He joined the Indian Audit and Accounts Service of Government of India in 1985, and he retired as the Deputy Comptroller and Auditor General of the country. Mr. Tiwari also headed the Financial Intelligence Unit as its director for 5 years, and currently is a full-time member of the National Financial Reporting Authority, NFRA. Very happy to have you on the show, Mr. Tiwari. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And with me, I also have our regular guest on Police Chowki, Mr. Javeed Ahmad. Mr. Javeed Ahmad is a former IPS officer who served as the DGP of Uttar Pradesh. Welcome back to Police Chowki, Mr. Ahmad.
Good afternoon, Sri, and a very good afternoon to my dear friend, Dr. Pravin Tiwari. I'm sure his insights into economic crime and how the systems are in place to control and prosecute those who are indulging in this, not only nationally but internationally, will be of great help to all our listeners. So let's start.
Right. So, like Mr. Ahmed mentioned, the topic of discussion is going to be economic crimes. Mr. Tiwari is, of course, an expert, and we're going to be picking his brains on various aspects related to economic crimes, try to understand what are the agencies which deal with this crime, how do they go about investigation, prosecution, and so on, what are some of the international issues related to certain economic crimes like money laundering and so on, as well as issues relating to extradition of accused individuals from different countries. So it's going to be a long conversation, but I'm very excited to kick off. So, Mr. Tiwari, the first question I want to talk to you about is the definition of economic crimes itself, right? Are there some general principles which can help us in identifying and classifying what an economic crime is? Because, of course, one angle of any economic crime is there is a illicit financial gain or avoiding financial loss, but that's not all, right? Because even a theft is an economic crimes in some essence, but that's not what we mean when we talk about economic crimes. It's very different from, say, a money laundering or a banking fraud or a corporate fraud. So what is your definition and classification of economic crimes?
Thank you for asking that question. I was doing some reading on this, and I found that the definition provided by the UNODC, that is United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, is one of the most comprehensive definitions, and that definition refers to the economic crime as broadly to any non-violent crime that results in a financial loss. Now, they also say that it refers to a broad range of illegal activities. And so the broad range of illegal activities, they have included many offenses. For example, the Committee of Ministers of Council of Europe has identified about 16 offenses to constitute economic crimes. And I might read out some of them. One of them is cartel offenses. Then there is fraudulent practices and abuse of the economic situation by multinational companies. There's also fraudulent procurement or abuse of state or international organizations' grounds. Then there's computer crime. Then bogus forms, consumer fraud, fraud to the detriment of creditors. So these are some of the examples that will give you an idea of the gamut of crimes that are, in common parlance, understood to comprise economic offenses.
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Tiwari.
Yes, Dr. Tiwari has given a very comprehensive definition of economic crimes, and there's very little to add to it, except to say that a lot of economic crimes happens with the connivance of public servants. And in the case of India, you can refer to things like the coal scam or the mining scam in Andhra Pradesh, or the NRHM scam in Uttar Pradesh. So these are examples of economic offences being committed by private individuals in connivance with government officials. So just to give another small addition to what a very comprehensive list that Dr. Tiwari had listed out. Yeah.
That's right. And we'll actually come to the socioeconomic background of the individuals who commit these kind of crimes, and who are involved. And public servants definitely is one important category of such white collar criminals. But in any case, let's move on now and talk a bit about legislative and the institutional setup which India has put in place for tackling economic crimes, right? Dr. Tiwari, could you maybe illustrate some of the legislations which deal with this issue? And I also have a side question that, has some of this changed after the economic reforms and liberalization since 1991? Because, the reason I'm asking this to you is because during the first 40 years, we had a very different economy, which meant that there was a lot more control, state control in the economy, the way it functioned, the kind of things that were criminalized, the kind of leeway which was given to business and corporate persons. So have you seen any shift in economic crimes that is a product of law ever since 1991 reforms have been enacted?
You see, the way I look at it, India has one of the most comprehensive legislative frameworks for addressing economic crimes, and most of it is post-economic liberalization in 1991. The most prominent economic legislation or economic crimes legislation that comes to mind is, of course, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act that was legislated in 2002. There is, and we'll talk in some detail about this legislation subsequently. The other one that comes to my mind is the FEMA, Foreign Exchange Management Act, that was legislated in 1999. Then there is the Companies Act, which was, a very comprehensive new Companies Act was enacted in 2013. That has a substantial part of it, devoted to addressing corporate frauds and corporate crimes. In addition to that, what comes to my mind is the SEBI Act. Again, it deals very comprehensively with the economic offenses that pertain to the capital market. Then one of the newest legislations that came into being was in 2018. It's called the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act, to deal with the economic offenders who have been able to flee the country. In addition to this, there's an IT Act and the Customs Act. Again, in their own way, they deal with the economic offenses. So these legislations, along with the rules framed thereunder, provide a very comprehensive framework for addressing economic crimes. And I might also add that, especially the Prevention of Money Laundering Act has been substantively influenced by the international regime, which has been in place for now over 2 decades to tackle the economic offense of money laundering and terrorism financing. So PMLA has undergone several amendments to make it fall in line with the international regime and standards. And the way it stands today, it's a very, very comprehensive legislation, especially to deal with the money laundering offense.
Right. Mr. Ahmed, I would like to pose this To pose the same question to you as well. Have you seen any shift since economic liberalization? Let me give you an example, right? Like, let's take smuggling. Now, when we had import and export restrictions back then, a lot of items were seen as smuggled goods, and people who were, trading these items were charged of smuggling offenses. And they had to face prosecution, but some of that went away when we, changed our laws and we allowed free imports and exports for that matter. So, have you seen this shift, or what has been your experience?
So you see, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act that I talked about is a legislation that came exclusively after the liberalization, 1991. And the unique feature of this legislation is that, number one, it criminalizes money laundering. So money laundering is a standalone offense. And if you see the definition of money laundering relates to the proceeds of crime of so many other offenses, So in the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, there's a schedule of offenses where there are, number of offenses, including theft, robbery, uh, kidnapping, smuggling. Smuggling is incidentally also one of those offenses. So if any of these offenses is committed, that leads to generation of the proceeds of crime. Then using those proceeds of crime or trying to hide those proceeds of crime in any manner, directly or indirectly, leads to the offense of money laundering. So you see, money laundering, we try to understand that there's an underlying offense called predicate offense, and there are so many predicate offenses, the proceeds of which will lead to laundering of money, which is a standalone economic offense. And all this regime has evolved, especially in the 21st century after 2000.
Yeah, Mr. Ahmed, your thoughts on the same issue?
Yes, I mean, to add to what Dr. Tiwari said, that not only have the laws come in post 1991 and possibly after the turn of the century, most of the structures that have now been built to implement these acts, whether it is the ED or the SFIO or other institutions that have been set up, and I'm sure Dr. Tiwari will talk about it in due course, have all been either set up subsequently or have been given more teeth and more body post 1991. So these changes have happened as a result of greater economic activity, the need for Indian economic crimes regime to be in alignment with international practices and international expectations, because there are a lot of international obligations that India has entered into, and creating these institutions and having these legislative pieces is part of that completion of that or obligation, that international obligation that India has to fulfill.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and to add to what Javeed Saab has said, just to put aside any misgiving that our legislative framework may not be comprehensive or may not be rigorous enough, there's a very formal procedure internationally to evaluate the legal framework of every country. This is called the Financial Action Task Force Framework, in which the offenses that qualify for being designated offenses for money laundering are prescribed. And all the countries are expected to provide for these offenses in their legislative framework. And that's why, if you look at the schedule to the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, that schedule includes all those offenses which are internationally recognized as the predicate offenses for money laundering. Therefore, and this regime, from time to time is evaluated by the FATF whether our law, especially the PMLA, conforms to international standard or not. So again, to repeat myself, that the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, especially, and also along with that other legislation, do conform to the highest international standard.
Right. So we know that the Enforcement Directorate or the ED is in charge of administering the Prevention of Money Laundering Act in the country, and ED is in the news very much these days for all right and wrong reasons. But I want to dig a bit into the process of ED, right? And in the context of money laundering, which you've spoken so far about. So if you could illustrate through a case example or something as to how does a money laundering case typically look like? How does ED go about investigation? What is the kind of evidence that is used? How is the prosecution done? How is a conviction achieved? So if you could just take us through the process with regard to a PMLA case.
So in case Javed Saab would like to take it up first, otherwise. So we were talking about the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and this legislation, it provides for two agencies. One is the Financial Intelligence Unit, which concerns gathering of financial intelligence to combat money laundering, and the other one is Enforcement Directorate, whose remit is to investigate and prosecute the cases of money laundering. Now, Enforcement Directorate, as everybody knows, is headed by a director, a very senior level officer. It has many zonal offices, and they have the power to, under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, to investigate and prosecute. Now, as I said earlier, that any predicate offense, because money laundering is a standalone offense, and money laundering deals with the proceeds of crime of so many offenses. So any of those offenses, when an FIR is registered, either by the police or any other law enforcement agency, then the money laundering investigation will start, and the Enforcement Directorate will be entitled to register an ECIR, Economic Crime Information Report, and take up the investigation. Now, the PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, empowers the officers of ED to not only investigate the cases of money laundering, but also to attach the property involved in money laundering. They also have a institutional setup for an adjudicating authority, which is empowered to confirm the attachment or order the confiscation of the attached properties. Then there's an appellate tribunal called Prevention of Money Laundering Appellate Tribunal, which is the appellate body for both the Enforcement Directorate and the FIU, because the Director FIU also has the powers to impose penalty on the financial institutions that do not meet the requirement of maintaining information or providing financial intelligence to the FIU. So this is broadly the administrative arrangement. After the investigation is completed, after the properties are attached, and then the ED, they take up the prosecution in especially designated special courts where the offenses are tried and concluded. So, if you have any other supplementary question to this, but this is basically the broad investigation and prosecution structure.
Yeah, just to double click on the investigation bit that you said, so what goes on in an investigation? What is the sort of like evidence that ED looks at to establish a case of PMLA?
So the investigation obviously will be aimed at gathering evidence that can stand the scrutiny of a court of law. But the unique feature about the PMLA is that I think it is one of the few legislations where the burden of proof is on the person accused. So it's a very rigorous law, and this provision has been made only to facilitate successful investigation and prosecution of money laundering, because internationally money laundering is looked at as a very, very serious offense. And I might add that the punishment for money laundering, if a person is successfully prosecuted, is the minimum punishment is 3 years of imprisonment, can go up to 7 years or 10 years. So this is one law which looks at money laundering, and rightly so, because we have to conform to the international practice in a very very serious manner. Of course, keeping in mind that the evidence gathered has to meet with the judicial scrutiny, the rigors of judicial scrutiny.
If I may add, Shri, I'd like to just expand a little bit on the word or the phrase predicate offense that has been used in the law and which was mentioned by Dr. Tiwari as well. Predicate means that it is the initiation of the PMLA investigation is predicated on something else. For example, just to give you an example, if someone who's into drug running or something like that, or illegal mining, that is a crime. So once a person is caught having indulged in narcotic trade or illegal mining or kidnapping, for that, or any such thing, and a case is registered, that becomes the predicate offense for the ED to initiate its PMLA case. So that needs to be highlighted. The second point about the dynamics of the investigation, I think PMLA investigation involves a lot of scrutiny of bank accounts where money transfers have taken place. Typically, money laundering involves what is called layering, where money moves from one account to another account and it's split into 15 other accounts, then it splits up into another 20 accounts. The idea is to hide the the ultimate place where the money has been rested. So you will have the money coming into Bank A in India, for example, then being shifted obviously through wire to, let us say, the Cayman Islands, and in Cayman Islands they will shift it to 15 other accounts. So there are now softwares available which help the investigators with the actual tracking of the money. But that essentially is what is done, and I'm sure Dr. Tiwari, who has more international experience, can give us a few more lines on this.
Yeah. So as Javeed Ahmad Saab said that, most of the money laundering offenses, they have an international dimension. In order to make the transactions more complicated and create a distance between the source of money and the destination of money, usually the money is transferred to a different legal jurisdiction, so that the job of the investigator and the prosecutor is much more difficult. And because a different legal jurisdiction is involved, the prosecutors as well as the investigators have to do a lot of work. And international cooperation is not an easy thing, because the evidence gathering has does become very 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 difficult, for the prosecutor, especially when foreign jurisdictions are involved. So the investigation process of the ED has to face all these challenges. Especially there are secrecy jurisdictions abroad, offshore jurisdictions where the legal framework does not permit easy sharing of information. Another aspect in this, that if our country does not have information sharing arrangement with those countries, then again the information will not be shared, making the job of the prosecution and investigation equally difficult. Fortunately, and the financial intelligence sharing is a lot more easier than sharing of information for evidence in a court of law. And I would especially like to talk about the financial intelligence unit system. Uh, Under the FATF standards, each country has to establish a financial intelligence unit. And most of the financial intelligence units in the world, they are connected together. So the sharing of financial intelligence among most of the countries is quite easy, and that system produces very valuable information. Of course, it's another matter to use that information for investigation, but when it comes to prosecution, where hard evidence is required to prosecute a money launderer, then it's a different legal process that has to be followed.
Right.
And the financial intelligence that is shared with a caveat that it cannot be used for evidence in a court of law. So that is one of the big challenges.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
No, that's very interesting, and I want to talk a bit more about financial intelligence with you, especially since you headed the FIU and so on. But before that, one quick question. So, in our conversation before this recording, you were talking about trade-based money laundering, right? TBML, which is something new. So, what is it? Could you explain us and also tell us, why is it such a challenge?
Yes. So, trade-based money laundering, as the name itself suggests, it has to be done through the trade. Now, imagine, we have small crimes and we have big crimes. We have a small scale money laundering. We can also have a big scale money laundering. Now, one of the lesser appreciated aspects of money laundering has been that the route of trade can be used for money laundering. And it makes eminent sense for a money launderer, because when big money is involved, and big money is involved and international borders are involved, you don't physically carry the money. You don't physically carry the proceeds of crime. So one of the easy methods of transmitting money to a different jurisdiction would be to take the help of trade. Now, this has two advantages, because in trade, when you are talking about the trade, the magnitude of the money is enormous. You're talking about millions of dollars, you're talking about billions of dollars. And since you are using the route of trade, you are legitimately using the international financial system. So, for example, if I am an export or import trade, then I can legitimately claim the formal banking channel to transmit my money. Now, how do I misuse the trade system to launder money? So, if I have proceeds of crime, for example, and which I want to send abroad, I don't have to physically send this money back. I can use both import and export. Now, you might have heard about misinvoicing, trade misinvoicing. Let me give you an example. So, supposing I'm importing goods worth $100, okay? Then I have the option of misinvoicing either on the higher side or on the lower side. If I misinvoice on the higher side, it will be import over invoicing. If I misinvoice on the lower side, it will be import under invoicing. Now, why would I over invoice my import? Because if I import goods of $100 and I over invoice for $150, that enables me to send $50 more out of my country under the guise of import. Similarly, why would I under invoice the import? Because let's take the example of export, for example. So if I under invoice my export, again going back to the example, supposing the worth of the goods is $100 and I invoice it for $80. So that enables me to send $20 worth of goods abroad, and in turn I'm getting only $80. So I have the option of realizing that $20 differential abroad and do whatever I like to do that. So import over invoicing enables me to send money abroad, whereas export under invoicing also enables me to send money abroad. Similarly, import under invoicing entitles me or enables me to receive value from abroad, and export under invoicing also does the same thing. So by juggling with the amount involved in the export and import, I'm able to send money or receive money through the formal financial system, and that money could be the proceeds of crime. Now, this is a very sophisticated system, and it operates on a large scale. A lot of work has been done in recent, say, in last 20 years. A lot of empirical work has been done to gauge the magnitude of the problem. And one very prominent organization that has been working quite prominently in this area is the Global Financial Integrity. It's a Washington based think tank. Now, that has estimated that between 2004 and 2013, the developing countries lost about $7.8 trillion because of the trade misinvoicing. Another example, which is very often quoted, and it has been quoted in the United Nations studies also, especially in relation to the African countries, that the African countries lose more money through illicit financial flows using the trade route than the official development aid that they receive and the FDI that they receive. So their loss is much more in terms of illicit financial flows out of those countries than the FDI and official development aid that they receive. Now, this is very significant because very little is known about the illicit financial flows, whereas the official development aid and the FDI gets a lot of prominence, while hiding the fact that the actual inflow of the funds may be much less than the loss due to outflow of funds from the African countries. This is very significant. Thankfully, in recent years, a lot of empirical work is being done to gauge the extent of the problem, to produce case studies, and also to try to suggest measures to tackle the problem.
Right. No, that's a very fascinating example, and that shows us why money laundering is perhaps a true economic crime, because this is a huge socio-economic crime against the inhabitants of any country when so much wealth is being taken away. And this definitely has a severe consequence on the welfare of the people of those countries. But I think we have spent quite some time talking about money laundering, and I want to move on to some other interesting things, right? Such as financial intelligence, which you mentioned earlier, and corporate fraud. So let's begin with financial intelligence. You said that, of course, there is a lot of global sharing of financial intelligence between agencies, but that's not actionable in a court of law. So I want to know from you broadly, how does the FIU, which you headed, operates, how much it relies on human, OSINT, TechInt, what are the kind of things it's looking at, what are the surveillance measures that it has put in place to tackle financial crimes?
So, as the name suggests, FIU is financial intelligence system which every country has to mandatorily set up. There's the Financial Action Task Force has 40 recommendations, which are standards. One of those recommendations pertains specifically to FIU, and that requires each country to set up an FIU. Now, by definition, FIU is a central autonomous unit that does three things. It receives information, it processes information, analyzes information, and it also transmits the information. So in India, the FIU was set up in 2006. It had a statutory basis under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which also gives FIU certain powers, which include the power to receive information from the financial institutions, power to access their information, and power to disseminate information to designated agencies. So, which means that FIU cannot share information with everybody else. FIU can share information only with designated law enforcement and investigating agencies. Now, how does FIU get information, and what does it do? So the rules prescribe what information FIU should be receiving. Now, under the PMLA rules, there are certain important reports which every financial institutions must share with the FIU. And the most important of these reports is called STR, or Suspicious Transaction Report. Now, what is STR? STR is any transaction which, in the eyes of the financial institutions, raises a suspicion that it could involve proceeds of crime. So the law says that as soon as the financial institution comes to a determination that the transaction being analyzed could be proceeds of crime, then it has to immediately send that information to FIU. Now, FIU has a designated format in which this information has to be submitted to FIU. Then there's a cash transaction report, which again is a statutory requirement under the PML rules. Now, what does cash transaction report say? It says that any cash transaction which exceeds rupees 10 lakh in a month has to be mechanically reported to FIO. In addition to these two reports, there is a report called Non-Profit Organizations Transaction Report. Again, it has a monetary ceiling that transactions above rupees 10 lakh in a month have to be routinely reported to FIO. Another important report that comes to FIO is called the Cross-Border Foreign Transactions Report. Here, the monetary ceiling is 5,000. So, FIU will receive all such cross-border transaction report, irrespective of whether they relate to a suspected crime or not. It will report, mechanically come to the FIU. Now, after all these reports have come to the FIU, FIU is expected by law to analyze that information. And you would appreciate that, the amount of information that comes to FIU is humongous. So, in order to analyze that information, FIU, any FIU for that matter, has to have in place an automated, very sophisticated information analysis system. And as a result of that analysis, if FIU comes to the conclusion, the analyst in FIU comes to conclusion that the transaction involved could be proceeds of crime and must be investigated, then FIU transmits that information to a investigating agency or law enforcement agency. Now, all this thing has been laid down in the law. So you see that the FIU is like the link between financial institutions like banks on one hand and the investigating authorities on the other hand. So, for example, if the bank suspects that a financial transaction could involve corruption by a public servant, then it will generate an STR based on the profile of that public servant. If a public servant is there and his account receives a huge amount of money, obviously it will raise a suspicion. So the bank has to analyze that transaction, keeping in mind the profile of the public servant, and then based on the bank's suspicion, it will raise a suspicious transaction report to the FIU. And then if FIU on further analysis comes to the conclusion that yes, it could involve proceeds of corruption, then it will send it to CBI for further investigation. So this is the value chain, that the information travels from the financial institution to the FIU, where there'll be a very sophisticated information analysis system, which will have the capacity to gather information from other sources also, because it's like a pool of information where information from different sources is coming in. So FIU will have the capacity to link all that information into clusters of information and then make sense out of it, and then take a conscious decision whether that person or that subject must be investigated. And if it comes to that conclusion, then obviously it will decide which investigating agency will be the appropriate agency to investigate into that case. And accordingly, it will transmit that information. All that happens online in a very secure environment. And then it leads to further investigation and prosecution.
Right. So now I want to bring up the issue of corporate frauds as well, because I think it is very much connected to what you mentioned about FIU and the work it does. India has had a fair share of corporate frauds over the years: Satyam scam, Sharda scam, ILFS, PNB, bank defrauding cases. There have been a bunch of them, and many have been caught, many have been prosecuted, but there are so many which still manage to slip away. I want to begin with you, Mr. Ahmed. Say, let's you there is some information of a corporate fraud which is transmitted to CBI. Based on your experience, Mr. Ahmed, what happens then? Like, how does the investigation kick in? What are the aspects of investigation? What is the kind of evidence that is looked at?
Unfortunately, the CBI does not have suo motu jurisdiction in such matters. The CBI will only come in where public servants are involved. If public servants are part of that corporate fraud, and often they could be, and we talked about it at the initial stages of our talk today, then CBI would definitely come in. And once the CBI comes in, then the first thing that they do is, register what is called a regular case or an FIR, and the process of collecting information on the basis of which this allegation has been made in the first place starts. Obviously, the team that does this work in the CBI includes bankers, and chartered accountants are also co-opted. It's part of the system there. There are chartered accountants who help the investigators going through the stacks of financial transaction data that is made available. Bankers are part of the CBI structure formally, so they chip in, and then the case is made out. But I'm sure Dr. Tiwari has more to add to this.
Yeah. So corporate frauds is another major area where economic offenses are committed, and the Indian Companies Act has very elaborate provisions to deal with the corporate fraud. Now, you might have heard about the Registrar of Companies, which is an authority established under the Companies Act to register companies. They also have the powers under the law to carry out investigation of companies. Now, if as a result of the investigation into the affairs of any company, if the registrar of companies comes to the conclusion that it should be investigated from the perspective of corporate fraud or economic crime, then the matter can be sent to the Serious Fraud Investigation Office by Government of India, which in this case will be the Department of Minister of Corporate Affairs. Serious Fraud Investigation Office also is a creation of law. It is established under Section 211 of the Companies Act. They have the power to investigate economic crimes, especially the corporate frauds, and they also have the power to confiscate property, to freeze property, or even to make arrest. Offenses under the Companies Act 2013, as I said some time back, that Companies Act was overhauled in 2013, and now it has become a very, very comprehensive piece of legislation to deal with all conceivable aspects of corporate governance, including tackling corporate crimes. So the Companies Act 2013 say that all the offenses under the Companies Act which have to be investigated, they are cognizable offenses. And once investigation is started by the SFIU, then no other investigating agency of the central government or any state government shall proceed with the investigation in such a case. Now, these are very important provisions which empower the SFIU to carry out investigations of corporate malfeasance or corporate fraud in a very, very efficient manner. The only point that needs to be understood that Serious Fraud Investigation Office can take up an investigation only under stipulated conditions. And one of those conditions is that when it receives a report of the Registrar of Companies, The other condition is that if the company itself passes a special resolution that its affairs need to be investigated for criminal misbehavior, and another condition is that in the public interest, if there's a request from any department of central government or state government. So these are few conditions which are necessary for SFIU, Serious Fraud Investigation Office, to undertake any investigation. Usually, the SFIU, if it comes to the conclusion that some other aspects of its investigation must be looked into by other agencies, it does forward those reports to other agency. And I can give you an example that the National Financial Reporting Authority, which looks into the misconduct of auditors of big companies. If the SFIU comes to the conclusion that the auditor of the company may be a party to the corporate fraud, then it will report a part of its investigation results to the National Financial Reporting Authority for action under the company law. Because National Financial Reporting Authority has the statutory power to investigate the misconduct of chartered accountants and also impose penalty on them. Now, I can give you one example in which the National Financial Reporting Authority has passed an order recently where the initial investigation of corporate fraud was done by the SFIU, and SFIU came to the conclusion that the auditor of the company had not done his job properly. And because if he had done his job properly, then he would definitely have raised a red flag of the corporate fraud. So NFRA investigated that case and found that yes, there was a professional misconduct on the part of the auditor of the company, and NFRA imposed a penalty on that auditor. So this order is in the public domain and can be accessed at the NFRA website. Suffice it to say that the legal framework for addressing corporate frauds, including misbehavior or misconduct on the part of the auditors, is there in the Companies Act in a very elaborate manner. And there are at least three agencies under the Companies Act 2013, which is namely Registrar of the Companies, Serious Fraud Investigation Office, and the National Financial Reporting Authority, which are empowered legally to look into different aspects of corporate misbehavior, corporate fraud, and also to impose legal monetary penalties on the perpetrators.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Tiwari, for that detailed exposition. So I wanted to bring up another aspect of economics crimes, right, which is that they are transnational in nature. That is, individuals and entities across borders may be involved in a particular situation. And adding to that, some of the individuals involved in a crime may also try to escape the jurisdiction of law by running away to another country. We have seen this in famous cases of Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, and so on, right? So since 2018, we actually have a law on this. I think you mentioned this at the beginning, the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act. So I wanted to know from both of you as to, what is the challenge here? Has this new law actually helped? What is the actual problem when it comes to extraditing these individuals to our country? Are there any policy gaps in this matter that needs further addressing?
You see, when we were talking about the various aspects and the various methods of economic crimes, we talked about how export invoicing and under invoicing and over invoicing is a tool used for money laundering. We also talked about how various transactions across various sovereign nations are used to hide the money which has been illegally got. So, and you took the examples of Vijay Mallya and others who are sitting in foreign shores. Now, while on the one hand there is substantial and increasingly a better atmosphere of cooperation between law enforcement agencies for sharing of information about financial crime, and their structures and systems have been built. The fact remains that every country is very conscious of its sovereignty. It really jealously and rightly so guards it. And equally importantly, they have, while the intent to punish an economic offender may be common to all the countries involved, they each country may have its different procedural law. So the procedure prescribed by law in France, for example, is different from that which is prescribed in the UK. The UK, the procedures are broadly similar to what the Indian system is, because we have kind of taken a lot from the common law principles. So when information is to be sought, or it has to be sought in a manner from France or some other country, or even the UK or the Arab countries in the Middle East, the investigator has to meet the legal requirements of that country. Sitting in India, I have as an investigator, I have to meet the requirements of that country, and then only will the information be made available to me, which the country may be even ready to do it, but obviously there are processes and legal requirements which have to be followed. And often it is not only time taking, it requires an understanding of laws relating to various matters in various sovereign states. So these create complications, these create obstacles, then, and these are very time consuming processes, where often formal one-to-one meetings may or may not be possible. Language may be a barrier. That is one part of it. The other part of it is that the banks in those jurisdictions may have their own processes, and they may be some countries may even have a legal requirement of the banks not being able at all to provide the information, as Dr. Tiwari earlier mentioned. So these issues come up. Then you talk about the extradition. India does not have extradition treaty with every country in the world. It has extradition treaty with maybe about 25 countries. So if the fugitive is sitting in a country which does not have extradition treaty with India, then extradition will not happen. And some other semi-formal or diplomatic methods are utilized, explored, for the person to be brought back to India. Conditionalities may be put on it. So these are very time-consuming, very tedious processes in which not only the investigating agency but the diplomatic officials of the diplomats of the two countries involved may have to intervene, because the diplomatic protocols have to be followed when these efforts are being made.
Right. Dr. Tiwari, my question to you is, has the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act helped in sort of remediating this situation, or has it not helped at all?
See, as Javeed Sahab was telling earlier, that we are talking about a very complex and complicated international scenario, which enables the perpetrator of the crime to create a distance between the scene of the crime and the destination of the money, and the man also. For example, there are many jurisdictions in the world, especially international financial centers, small island nations, for example, which allow you to take economic citizenship. So you pay $1 million, you invest $1 million in a country, and they give you the citizenship. Now, once that happens, then you are dealing with the citizen of another country, irrespective of the fact that that person was in your country and the offense was committed in your country. Two things happen. One, that the money has money has gone out of your financial system to a different legal jurisdiction. The money is in a different financial institution now, and the person is also in a different legal jurisdiction. Another thing will happen, that most likely that money will be hidden under a very complex corporate structure. So it will not perhaps be held in the account of the person concerned, but it will be held under, say, uh, in an account which will be owned by a company in another jurisdiction, and that company in turn will be held by a trust incorporated or set up in another jurisdiction. So we're talking about very, very complex legal system, where both money and the man, uh, they are quite distant from the law enforcement agencies of the country in which the crime was committed. Now, obviously, as Javisa was saying, that for both money and the person involved, you will have to conform to the legal procedures and process of that country. So first of all, you will have to have a MLAT, mutual legal assistance treaty, with that country. If that is not there, then your job is much more difficult. Fortunately, the Financial Action Task Force, which is the international enterprise or international endeavor of all the countries to come together and thrash out the issues, has taken a lot of steps to make this process simple. And it has set up a common framework in which the information about the men and money will have to be shared. It has also put in place a mechanism where, if a country is not cooperating, then there's a procedure for reporting that country to the FATF. For example, I know for sure that when the individual country is evaluated for its conformity to international standards, then one of the attributes or one of the parameters for evaluation is that how much that country has cooperated. And so, for example, if India has not been receiving cooperation from a particular country, why? Then India has the right to report that country to the FATF when that country is evaluated. That, look, I sent so many requests for cooperation, and I did not receive the desired cooperation, and that will go against that country. It will reflect in the negative evaluation of that country. So to summarize it, that you know, the international regime, which is still evolving, has done quite a bit to resolve these issues, legal issues, which were major issues, say 10, 15 years back. Because some of the big centers like Switzerland and Bahamas, Cayman Islands, big international financial centers, they were governed by their secrecy laws that made them very attractive financial destinations. And those secrecy laws did not permit sharing of information freely. Fortunately, now a lot of water has flown down the Ganges, and now everybody operates under the common framework. But still, there are practical implementation problem, and that's why the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act was brought in 2018. It's a relatively very new legislation, but it empowers the government to confiscate the property of an offender who has fled the country. In coming times, I'm sure it will prove to be very handy for the investigators and prosecutors in the country. But yes, still the problems remain, and largely driven by the complicated legal procedures and processes of the countries where the offenders have fled.
Yeah, if I may add, Shri, that the international community is much more receptive to requests which are made when the fugitive is suspected to be involved in terror activities or in narcotics.
Right.
So these are comparatively, and I would emphasize the word comparatively, easier, tracks to follow because there is much larger unanimity internationally about stamping these out than in other methods.
Right.
I think Dr. Tiwari would agree with that.
Yes, definitely, sir. Definitely. And there's been a lot of progress, and the speed with which the information is shared, the content of the information is shared, has improved tremendously. Now, until some years back, for example, we had great difficulty in getting information from countries like Switzerland, which were governed by their own secrecy laws, which were very, very strict confidentiality laws. Now, those things are a thing of the past, and there is a relatively much more easier flow of information between our country and the secrecy jurisdictions.
Right. So that's a good note to end, I believe, because things are changing. There is more international cooperation. And finally, there might be a day when Swiss money, which is so much ingrained in the Indian political psyche that, all the criminals of the country are stashing their money in Swiss bank. May that day come when we have, that route being closed forever and all that money brought back to the country. I know it's wishful. But anyway, thank you so much to both of you for joining me in this conversation today. Especially you, Dr. Tiwari, for sharing your valuable knowledge with us. And thank you, Mr. Ahmad, for your support and participation in Police Chowki. Until the next episode, stay tuned to All Things Policy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Javeed sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you.
Praveen, bye-bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.